or welcome if you're new. It's really good to see you today. My name is Vix and this is my channel, Goddess of Gore, where I like to talk about horror, thriller, fantasy and sci-fi books. Today I want to tell you about the 4 books I started and finished this week, so let's just get on with it, shall we? At the end of last week's wrap-up, I told you that I had just pulled out the title On Stranger Tides by Tim Powers out of my little jar. This is for the Once Upon a readathon that I'm taking part in this month on Team Pirates, and oh dear, boring. How did this influence Pirates of the Caribbean? My God, it was dull. This apparently was inspired by the golden age of Hollywood adventure films and promised an exciting tale of pirates, voodoo, zombies and the Fountain of Youth, but unfortunately though, I thought that it fell short of its potential and left me underwhelmed. So the story follows John Shandagnac, a puppeteer seeking revenge on his deceitful and general rotter of an uncle who finds himself thrust into the world of piracy after a pirate attack. As Jack Shandy, he becomes entangled in a plot to resurrect the dead, orchestrated by Beth Herwood's father. So as I said, the premise is intriguing, but the book is so slow, with tiny bursts of something happening before dragging itself along again. My God, it was a shocker. The characters were terribly written. Not one single person in the whole book was fleshed out, and when I finished I struggled to remember any one of the characters except for John, Blackbeard and Elizabeth. I really should have DNF'd the book. My resentment of it would have been less harsh, I think. Everyone and everything was underwhelming and one-dimensional. And I don't know why this book is so raved about. Like, this was the most hyped pirate book when I was searching the internet for pirate horror books. This isn't horror at all. While the inclusion of voodoo and Blackbeard and the Fountain of Youth should have added depth and intrigue to the story, even these elements fail to reach their full potential. The magic in here is uninteresting. So basically, On Stranger Tides did have the synopsis to be an amazing epic adventure of cutthroat piracy and despicable characters, but it led me to hate the book instead. And then, in the mad rush to finish the books I was reading before the Bram Stoker Awards that happened on Saturday night, I read Reluctant Immortals by Gwendolyn, Kiste. And after I talk about the next book, I will spoil who won if you haven't already heard. Oh, and I watched the ceremony on YouTube, and I will put the link for that and my Who Will Win video in the description if you haven't already seen it. If you would like to see my prediction before I spoil everything. So, Reluctant Immortals then. This is set in the 1960s, following the immortal lives of Lucy Westerner from Dracula and Bertha Mason, the first wife from J.R.R, as they try to escape the hauntings of their former lives and lovers from lifetimes ago. So this book is about a lot of women, 3 famous names and a lot of unnamed side characters, all being driven either into a wild lust or madness by 2 infamous men from horror literature, Count Dracula and Mr. Rochester, of obviously Dracula and Jane Eyre. The women are positively fawning over these men, and I think that's the book's problem. Lucy had been protecting Dracula's ashes for years, talking to him, begging for him to talk back. Like, seriously? And B, my God, she was terrified of Rochester, but just made all the decisions that led her back to him every single time I adored the scene towards the end of this book though, when Lucy asks Walter, the projectionist, to play 2 final movies at the drive-in movie theatre, J.R.R. and Nosferatu, as a wonderful distraction. So good. While the premise of this story does seem really good, I'm not sure it worked in theory. Is it even a horror? I think that may be debatable since nothing actually horrific happens. I'm also not sure why Gwendolyn chose to centre the book in 1969, The Summer of Love, because although it does mention hippies in that the hippies were doing this or the hippies were doing that, it really could have been in any era, in any part of the world. It really wouldn't have made any difference to the story. So yeah, not really enjoyable for me, but I know for sure it will be amazing for someone else. So for me, this was a bit like, if I had to pick something, Thelma and Louise. If Thelma and Louise had no story or character or setting. Louise, of course, is Lucy, the one with her head more screwed on, as it were, and Thelma is Bee, making a lot of bad decisions, and of course their Buick convertible with the top down is the Thunderbird car they drive off the cliff at the end of the film. Now, although this story didn't work for me, what did impress me was Gwendolyn's writing. It was beautiful and so easy to follow. It flowed marvellously and it was humorous and touching, and I found it very easy to drop myself into the book. The pacing of the story was very slow, but the writing seemed fast and I couldn't help but fly through this book. So for that reason, I would try another book from this author again, just to see if it was just this story that didn't work. So next it was the Fervor by Alma Katsu, another Bram Stoker nominee. Alma Katsu tends to get historical fiction and put a supernatural twist on that historical moment. So when I heard that this was about Japanese folklore during World War II, I was expecting something amazing, dazzling. I was not expecting bloody spiders that cause people to go mad and kill people. Jesus. It's not exactly spooky, weird or horrifically gory. It was very historical fiction that mostly gave me a history lesson at how the Americans during World War II in 1944 treated the Japanese settlers who had lived in that country and how they were persecuted and racially abused during that time. This is all well and good. That's not the problem. Just don't try to sell me a paranormal, spooky, supernatural book when there is a smidgen, a mere grain of wrong moment in the book when this is actually happening. I was expecting big things from the Jorogumo, the spider demon from Japanese folklore, but this never really came to fruition for me. Instead, it was like an infection of spider eggs that made them go mad, and the white Americans were all blaming the Japanese for infecting them. And the timelines and perspectives of each character did get confusing, so I would start the chapter not knowing where it would be going. It would just say where it was set, the place, and it wasn't until the characters came onto the pages I would know whose story it would be told from. So it was very confusing. So all of the negatives out the way. The story, no. The confusing chapters, no. Again, although Alma's writing is glorious, and this is something that keeps me coming back to her time and time again. Her stories are fascinating, and the blend of factual history and twisting it is what I expect from her every time. It just seemed that this book lost me, but at no point did I want to ever stop reading it, and that is a credit to Alma's writing. And then one last quick book to finish the week was Sacculina by Fracassi. This is another Once Upon a Readathon book choice, not pirates this time, but it is set on the water. And this was a fun, quick-paced, quite sick little novella. Honestly, if you didn't like barnacles or any kind of shelled little creature before, you will never look at one the same way again after reading this book. Wow. So the story is basically a family of two brothers, one dad. One of the brothers' friends hire a fishing boat complete with a captain or host or whatever to provide the knowledge and the equipment for a memorable little fishing trip, since one of the brothers has just spent the last 4 years in prison. But something is lurking in the water. It might be small, but there's hundreds of them waiting to feed. This is a novella that really goes into the realms of cosmic body horror and very real dread. It blends together elements of body horror and psychological terror to create a truly gross and haunting story. The imagery in this little 100-page book is just gross and just adds more and more tension and a sense of unsettling feeling as the boat drifts further and further out to sea. The descriptions of the little creatures or organisms or whatever they were and what it does to the body are beautifully described to bring absolute revulsion. Philip's attention to detail and ability to tap into our fears make this a wonderful novella for freaking the reader out. While the novella is quite short, it manages to pack an impressive amount of body horror and dread into its compact little form. The pacing is fantastically fast as you root for the family to survive their fishing trip. This is my first experience of Philip Fracassi's writing and it really impressed me, and this was an excellent choice on my part. Yeah, I'm taking the credit here. For a water setting book for a horror fan. So I managed to finish with something fun after a week of bad to meh books for me. So that's all of the ones I finished. What else then? I only read one chapter of Lord of the Rings, Two Towers this week, so I'm now on chapter 8 in the book. And I have just started No Gods for Drowning by Hailey Piper. I've no real idea what's happening right now, but it seems that someone is going around making human sacrifices to a god called somebody, or something like that. But there's plenty of body horror and gore in this so far with the human sacrifices, and it will hopefully be the first book I finish for next week's wrap-up. Oh, I said I would spoil the Bram Stoker's Superior Choice in a Novel prize, didn't I? Well, would you bloody well believe it, but my favourite to win actually won. I'm very pleased for Gabino. His acceptance speech, it was very funny. You really should give it a watch if you can, but I don't think I have anything else to share. So what about you guys? What have you been reading, or are you having some time off and doing something else instead? Have you read any of the books that I've mentioned today and either loved them or hated them? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to press the like button if you did like it, and subscribe if you haven't already and want to hang around for a little bit longer. But anyway, I will leave you, as I always do, with one of my favourite quotes from the books I've read this week. Whereas America was made up of so many different kinds of people, you'd think they'd have gotten used to each other by now. How exhausting it must be here to hate everyone who was different. Make some good book choices this week, my friends, and I hope to see you all again soon. Until next time, bye bye.